Hi, everybody. I'm Jean Levicki with DEG. I manage our D2C Alliance, and we're glad to have you with us for Streaming by the Numbers. Today's conversation is going to be a look at how availability data drives discovery, how to leverage catalog depth as a retention tool, and what divergent content strategies are winning. We have a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. David and Tim will be taking questions. So if you do have a question, just drop it in the chat, which is at the bottom of the screen. And also, which everyone ever wants to know, yes, the presentation slides and a recording of this session will be made available to all the attendees. So hopefully that'll make it a little easier for everyone. So now let's get started with the program. Through the D2C Alliance's TV and Connected Devices Committee, I have the pleasure of collaborating with David Sanderson. David is the founder and CEO of Reelgood. He started the company in 2015 after working several years as a product manager at Facebook, and he's been running the company ever since. Reelgood is the entertainment industry's source of truth for TV movie streaming data. The company tracks title availability, catalogs, and metadata across more than 300 global streaming platforms in real time. And this data powers decision making for studios, distributors, streamers, consumer tech, and AI companies across the industry. And to be chatting with David today, we're really happy to have State of Streaming's Tim Rowe. Tim founded State of Streaming as a solution to separate the signal from the noise of streaming news for media buyers. Their coverage acts as a pattern recognition layer for decision makers across the ecosystem, and it's delivered as unique daily news and a weekly podcast. So, welcome, David and Tim. Nice to have you with us.
Hey, Jane.
Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having us.
I know you have a lot of great information to share with our group today, so I'm going to pop off and then turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Jane. David, we've got a lot of content to go through today, so we should probably get started and dive right into it. Throughout this, we're going to take questions. So if you've got a question, please drop it into the chat. We'll make time for those at the end. As Jean mentioned, there will be a recording of this. You'll get the slide deck as well. So feel free to take screenshots, take notes, but mostly sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. David, ready to get us started?
Let's jump in. Yeah.
All right, let's do it.
All right. So yeah, I'll give a little bit of background on us as we hop in. Gene, thank you for the intro. Hopefully just give some context to some of the insights that we'll dig into today. So as Gene mentioned, yes, we track over 300 streaming services globally. We do that in real time with about 4 million titles in our database, which is effectively kind of everything that exists. And as Gene mentioned, we've been doing this for a while. So we have with that 7 years of historical daily availability. A little bit of context on sort of how we ended up in the data space, because we actually never planned on being here. When I started the company, we were building a consumer streaming guide, trying to simplify the experience for consumers, put all their streaming content into one app. As you can imagine, the data layer for that is critical. When we started out, very much underestimated how difficult that would be, and we licensed from existing like a legacy data vendor. And just found the data quality to be terrible, and it was killing our user trust and retention numbers. Doing things like where we would say, hey, this title's on Netflix, they click play, it left 3 weeks ago. Those users don't think, oh, Reelgood's data vendor sucks. They just think, oh, this app sucks, and they churn and they're gone forever. So we realized that having accurate, real-time, quality, deduplicated data was make or break for us. So necessity, the mother of all invention. First we did a big analysis of all the existing vendors in the space. Didn't really find any that hit the bar that we needed. So as Gene mentioned, I started my career at Facebook, scaled a lot of stuff in the early days using machine learning, kind of took the same approach here, built a machine learning model. We've probably spent tens of millions on it, trained it over 8 years, thanks to help from over 100 million Reelgood users. And basically what it does is gathers the data from what's on all of these streaming services in real time. More than anything, it's sort of crown jewels, its ability to map everything together. As we all know, there's no industry standard ID. So having to map on metadata and in the absence of IDs. So you can kind of think of it as doing the work of thousands of people manually inputting data, but obviously much better because there aren't sort of the error prone things that happen with manual data entry. It can do it in real time. So the kind of end result is a much more accurate data set, usually at a lower price point because we don't have the overhead of thousands of people needing to manually do this. Bit of context on how we stumbled into it. First, the big tech companies came to us, running into the same data problem, and they needed the data to power their products. You can think major search engines, major tech companies, now AI companies. They asked us where we got our data from. We said we built it for ourselves. They offered us some big checks, and we oh, okay. And so we kind of fell into that. So for many years, we were powering the tech companies, but in the past few years, a number of the major studios and streaming services have come to us with completely different use cases for the same data set, but things around like licensing decisions, strategy around catalog, like just high level strategy, marketing, title analysis when they're looking at licensing an individual title. So anyway, we'll get into all of that today. All right. Tim, any questions so far? You already know most of our backstory.
No, I think that that's a great setup. We've got 3 acts today. Act 1, the hidden market. Then we're going to talk about the divergence. And lastly, we'll talk about the blind spot. What stood out to me as we were getting ready for this, David, is there's a very clear through line that I don't think is a surprise to anyone on this call. That is, attention follows the content and money follows the attention. But there are some gaps in visibility about where is the content, where are the eyeballs, how are they moving, and strategically, how do we make decisions about those things? So, yeah, let's dive into Act 1.
Absolutely. So one thing, this admittedly just, so a lot of these things I'll admit we kind of stumbled into as we were playing with the data, looking at different splices and dices of it. This one surprised me. So when I think about the top 8 SVODs, not only is that a lot of money nowadays, but like you'd think if you license from the top 8 SVODs, you're kind of covered. You kind of got access to effectively everything except for maybe, new releases, or brand new releases only on TVOD or theatrical. We found that absolutely to not be the case, actually. Only 12%, this is looking at movies, but only 12% of movies are actually available on the top 8 SVODs. So if you break that down, this is obviously deduplicated, but looking at the top 8 services, there's about 33,000 movies on those. But then there's almost 250,000 titles that aren't available on those services. And it's not necessarily just like old obscure content. There's a lot of even popular content that we'll talk about a little bit later. But this is spread across either like one, simply just no one has it right now on SVOD. Niche services like BritBox, as you're seeing here, obviously proliferation of AVOD. AVOD's capturing a lot of this stuff. And what's more than this is actually a large chunk of this is content not available in the US. And we've seen a lot, obviously, of our partners starting to license more content from abroad. And I think that there's kind of obvious competitive advantages in that, where there's not necessarily built-in demand, but you have some proof points of like, a title's done very well in other markets. There's probably a good chance that that's going to do well in the US, at least compared to a complete unknown title that you're creating from scratch.
I think what jumps out about this is there's so much content. In fact, my son definitely said it this weekend. I can't find anything to watch. Discoverability, that is kind of like the underlying mission to all of this. As you look at this whole content universe, there's lots of titles out there, and maybe we're going to get into it in a few slides here. What are kind of the trends and themes that you see about the content that is being chosen and the platforms, the apps where ultimately that content goes to live?
Yeah. Are you saying like how the content gets picked by the catalogs?
I think so. I think so.
Yeah.
I think simplifying this story then into a story of discoverability and ultimately utility for the user who wants to watch
Yeah.
it.
I mean, what's kind of standing out to me is there's 2 parts to it, right? There's picking your catalog, and then there's like merchandising your catalog. And those I think of as 2 very separate pieces. The example I always go back to
Yeah.
is there's this show Louder Milk, filmed in my hometown of Vancouver, Canada, and it was on Prime, so it would be in the top of the iceberg here, but it was on Prime for a long time. We have popularity scores from our users, and it was about the 800th most popular title in the US while it was on Prime. When it went to Netflix, it was the number 8th. So to me, that was a huge lesson in it's not just buying the content for your catalog, but figuring out obviously how you surface that content. And like the more you can obviously understand your users and whatnot, like picking from your catalog and presenting the right title is a key part of this.
I think you just hit it on the head then. So that merchandising piece, not just having the right content for my users in the way that I want to build a strategy, but then also how am I merchandising that content to get the most out of it?
Exactly. So On that note, perfect segue to kind of the changes in who's merchandising it and who's licensing it is AVODs. As we all know, I feel like years ago, AVOD was kind of a dirty term. It was sacrilegious to think about having ads in an on-demand system, but obviously things like Tubi have exploded. The market's completely changed where now, Netflix and the big streaming services have their own ad-supported tier. So somewhat unsurprisingly, what we saw when we looked at the data is the median time for titles going from SVOD to available on SVOD as 5 years ago was a median was 6 months. Now it's 2.5 months. So it's a much quicker timeline of stuff going to AVOD. A piece of context on this is titles that have gone from SVOD to AVOD. It doesn't include titles that have never gone to AVOD, which there are many of those, but this is sort of meant to illustrate just simply the change in time that we're seeing with it. And when you kind of peel the onion back a little bit to a little deeper layer, you see huge differences in the time to AVOD based on genre. And I think this is one of those things where when you look at it, you're like, oh, that makes sense. But until we looked at the data, simply didn't know this. But if you look at the top left, things like thriller, action, horror, it makes sense that those are things that go quickly to AVOD. At the bottom of the chart, the complete other end, as you can see, it's really family type content. So like family, animation, children content, those are much more evergreen titles. Those I know, speaking, I have two young kids, they will watch the same movie over and over and over. So it makes sense that those are kind of evergreen legacy content that stick on SVODs for a long time versus a horror flick. It's kind of seen quickly moves from an SVOD over to an AVOD.
David, something that stood out, I just made a note here. The DEG has now officially witnessed time to video from production,
Mm.
theatrical release, time to video, time to DVD, time to Blu-ray, time to SVOD, and now time to AVOD. I think we need to create like the visual timeline of that. There's
We need to
probably
pull up
more
a
too that I'm missing that I didn't capture in that, but that's what the trend feels like that you just shared about from SVOD to AVOD. It's the next evolution of that. No.
Yes, yeah, exactly. That's I mean evolution, and it's like now that's even obviously fast is playing into that as well too. It's like how is content moving to fast, sort of in the same AVOD bucket, but yeah. Which that's actually for this one here. This is just a snapshot of some historical availability for a title, but to your point, like this, I was actually surprised looking at this too. So Jurassic World, it was released into theatrical in June. I think it was about 1 month later that it came to Peacock. So it was a pretty quick turnaround from going theatrical to SVOD. Obviously, you can see it's being available on TVOD. But the reason I share this slide is largely what we see, where we see our partners unlock a lot of value is around when they have viewership data and then they can overlay it with historical availability. So, because sometimes they'll see a spike or a valley in viewership. And then once you overlay this, you can see, oh, it's because it went to Netflix that day, or like, oh, it dropped off Prime that day. It can kind of explain it. But also, what we've seen too with our partners is like looking at historical availability when you're looking to license any title is a key part of it because that really does affect the value of it. Like if it's been on Netflix for the past 3 years, there's probably a good chance a lot of people have seen it. Versus if you're, I know, especially like with the AVODs, they love to be like the first one to bring that to market. That's that's a very valuable title and sort of a critical piece to know. Should we move on to Act Two?
We should.
All right. So when we dug into the top 8 streaming services and how their catalogs have changed over the past year, again, this is the beauty where we can like have everything normalized. So we have like a single set of genres, single set of tags across all of the catalogs and all the content out there. You can see some really interesting trends on this. So looking at Disney just to start, like I thought it was interesting, sort of biography and reality, both things on sort of real life things, but I thought it was interesting. A little maybe more accessible reality stuff is kind of they're investing in, but getting rid of some of their biography content. And then when you look at Paramount, you see kind of the opposite. They increased their biography catalog quite a bit last year. And then the other one that stood out to me too, again, having kids was Apple TV. With children content, I think a lot of people actually don't know because they don't necessarily do a great job surfacing it, but Apple TV has a lot of very high quality children's content, and the numbers kind of reflected that this is an investment area for them. And I think it's something that sort of appears to be some competition against Disney, where it's like, Disney obviously famous for having the children's content. Apple TV seems to be investing pretty heavily in starting to build out that portion of their catalog.
And some maybe decisions upcoming about the future of Apple TV, perhaps then avoid and understanding what is the role of each streamer in the marketplace so that when those changes happen, I see obviously Paramount right on here there was some interesting data that we talked about, I feel like, on a podcast. Wasn't there some interesting data about the Paramount portfolio as it related
Oh,
to
yeah.
WBD and Netflix?
This is a whole thing I could nerd out on a whole 3 hour long
Separate
call. But
session.
yeah. But at a high level, it was interesting to see, like, again, when you combined the like Paramount has a much smaller catalog than Netflix, but when you merge sort of the HBO and or sorry the Max content and the Paramount content, not only does it get like relatively close to the size of Netflix, a little bit shy of it, but we saw some interesting stuff around like the popularity makeup of Paramount's catalog, where like they were very reliant on Warner titles. Where I think it was like for the top 10, four of the shows were licensed from Warner. There was a bit of a fall off curve as you looked at top 10 or top 50, top 100, but like a significant number of their top titles were licensed from Warner versus when you looked at Netflix, none of their top 10 were licensed from Warner. So that kind of, when again, digging into the data kind of showed us, it's like, for Netflix, this really wasn't nice to have. For Paramount, there's a little bit like it is a very, those are very, very important titles and very important catalog for them to have access to. And if Netflix was to pull the rug from under them, it could be very problematic. So it almost kind of helped explain some of the strategy we saw play out in the press where like Paramount was very aggressive about, trying to secure that. One other small ones I call out here that I thought was interesting was where was it? Oh, if you look at Hulu, as you can see, children content gone down. I'm just guessing here, but I'm like, last year it was kind of known that Disney and Hulu will be merging. It makes sense to me, like why would they be holding a lot of children's content when they're about to merge with like one of the kings of children's content? All right, switching gears a little bit into TV shows. We've talked a lot about movies so far, but with TV shows, again, we looked at the data. A lot of this is what you'd expect, but like with things like Paramount, where they've been around for a long time, have had a lot of like TV shows from the linear days. You can see there's a huge divergence in sort of like the depth of the TV shows that they have. So as you can see at the top right, like 12% of Paramount's catalog has seven, or TV shows have more than seven seasons. When you go down to Apple TV, none of them do. Kind of what you'd expect. But as you can see, just different strategies, like even looking at Netflix, it's relatively small. They've been around for a long time, but you can kind of see that their strategy is more shows with fewer seasons, as opposed to some of the sort of more legacy players are doing maybe fewer shows, but much more depth. What the right answer is, I have no idea. I think in one hand, you're throwing out titles, new stuff, people like fresh, and that can keep people engaged. On the other hand, if you can lock someone in on like a Yellowstone, something they love, they stick around, they watch all seasons, that's another way to retain people. Tim, any questions on this before we take it home?
No, I think what's just so interesting is kind of that, like, we're all unique companies executing unique business strategies, just happen to be competing for attention that's on the biggest screen in our homes connected to the internet. That's what's standing out to me on this slide is everyone's got a different strategy, but having insight into what those strategies might be and reading the tea leaves a little bit, how that can create insight for ourselves.
Yeah, and I think that's been it's been fun to see with our partners, exactly as you said. Like sometimes they will see like, okay, a competitor is moving more into this catalog. Game on. We're gonna fight hard to try to win that content away from them. Or sometimes the opposite. They're like, okay, they're zigging, we're gonna zag. Sometimes we've even seen things with some partners where, to their credit, they work with us and then they look at their own data and they're like, oh, I didn't realize that we had the biggest catalog of horror. Like that's something that's unique. That's now going to be our entire marketing strategy for the year. So it's like even if you have your own data, like what I've seen is then when they can compare it to others, it can sort of affect the strategy that they take. So getting into well, we'll go through a few things around some blind spots, a few different angles to it. So one is obviously we've all seen this huge, I've been amazed at the growth of channels, like the Prime channel, Prime channels, there's Roku channels, I think YouTube has channels. All of them have like the Maxes or the Apple TV channels. As I talked about at the beginning, data in this space is very hard. And like Max has its own ID for a piece of content and Prime has its own ID for a piece of content, even if it's the exact same. You need to map this together. And we are seeing that become a growing problem for channels and sort of like the root channel, if you will. So one example we found a few weeks ago was we looked at Max compared to the Max channel on Prime. And the first thing that stood out is two massive titles were simply missing. They were on Max, but not on the Max Prime channel. So Dune, 4 Oscars, Moonlight, Best Picture winner in Max, not on the Max Prime channel. And when we dug a little bit deeper, we saw there's actually more than that. So it was about 4% of Max's catalog was missing on the Prime Max channel, and that's 81 titles. And again, nothing nefarious here. Like I know the people at these teams, they're working really hard to do this. But again, without sort of a unified data set, it can be hard to identify these problems. And these open up like pretty real legal risks in the terms of sort of marketing laws around, if you're paying for X, you're supposed to be getting X. But here, kind of, you're getting, if you're getting it on the channel, you're getting X minus 88 titles. As well as just simply consumer trust. Like some of these massive titles, like Dune or something. If your friend says, like, I'm like, hey, Tim, like, check out Dune, it's on Max. And then you're like, oh, great, I have Max on Prime. And you go and it's not there. Not the best look. But more switching more to the opportunity side of things.
This one really surprised. We went to see
Yeah.
Project Hail Mary this weekend. This one really shocked me.
Me too. And you know what's funny is like again, we weren't even digging. We have a list of all of the movies and shows. Like you can with our data splice it down to like what's not on SVOD and sort it by popularity. And I was doing that for something completely unrelated and just happened to notice. I was like, The Martian? I was like, there's no way. And I went and looked and like, yeah, it was not available on any SVOD. So this is more of an overarching theme of just like, when we see like the new Top Gun is announced, we see a massive spike in the old Top Gun, the popularity of that on our platform. This is just sort of in general an opportunity to just sort of like look at major titles that are coming out, look at major sort of like world news and events and things and see how your catalog can follow that because there are massive spikes. And if you can be the one to identify that, you have a big leg up on your competitors. But yeah, so with Project Hail Mary, obviously it was number one in the box office. The Martian is by the same author, it's the same screenwriter, and it was not available on any SVODs for a good chunk of time. Most of the run that Project Hail Mary was, kind of popping in theaters. Luckily, our friends at Philo picked it up recently. I think it just came to AMC Plus after we put this data out. Hopefully, we helped them. But yeah, I was surprised too. And like digging more into that, The Matrix, the greatest movie of all time, obviously, hasn't been available. There's a lot of movies that are sitting out there that just simply aren't on any SVOD right now, and it just feels like massive kind of opportunity for the right people to go and grab them.
There's a few of my favorites on here. I used to own Office Space on DVD. I don't know if anyone remembers when you would put it into the DVD player, it loaded up and looked like there was an error. I don't know.
Oh,
I don't know. That is a very niche reference for anyone that might have owned that on DVD. But yeah, these are some major titles. Definitely some
yeah,
gaps and some opportunity. I see that we're getting close to time, and I
yeah.
do see a question in the chat, so I want to make sure that we've got time for it. And if anyone else
Right.
has a question, please take advantage of now to do that. Drop it in. It looks like all right. I think these are going to be the same questions coming in. David, take us across the finish line, and I'll bubble these questions up first in a minute.
Perfect. Yeah. So, I mean, as we talked about kind of our three acts, one, we think about the top eight, it's going to be in the whole market. It's only the tip of the iceberg. And then for catalog strategy, as you kind of mentioned, Tim, massive, huge different changes. When you look at the different players in the space and just that, I encourage everyone to think about making conscious decisions when you're going either against your competitor, you're finding your own opportunities, how you're marketing your service. And then lastly, just there's a lot of great titles that are kind of hiding in the data. If you dig in, that can be another competitive edge just to have some high quality titles that no one else has. That's it.
Awesome. A question, one point of clarification. Lou asked regarding the TV catalog slide. This was early on in the presentation.
Yeah,
Regarding the TV catalog slide, does this include originals and acquisitions?
it does. Yes. Yeah.
Cool.
That's a good question.
And
It's something I'm always trying to find an industry standard for how original is defined, but that does just include everything.
awesome.
Yeah.
You're welcome, Lou. We've got another question here. What about the time from TVOD to SVOD, AVOD? What is the standard at the moment?
I
Any
wish I
insight
had
there?
yeah, I'm gonna just go off the cuff. I'd prefer to obviously give like absolute data to it, but I mean, as you can kind of see, let's use one as an example. So Jurassic World, as you can see, we're seeing more the time from theatrical to sort of let's call it on demand shrinking. But then we're also seeing a lot of times SVODs are picking it up at the same time as TVOD. I don't have a hard metric behind that, but typically it's like it comes available on TVOD and then one SVOD typically has, as you can see here, like exclusivity for the first window.
Awesome. Question I'm curious about, David. How are you seeing, and there's not enough time obviously to answer it in its entirety, so maybe just a couple of use cases, content and licensing and acquisition teams. How are they using this data, maybe in conjunction with other data? Maybe it's a unique data set that's creating new insights. How are you seeing partners use that data?
Yeah, so specifically on the licensing team, and we're lucky we work with some of the biggest studios that make billions of dollars of decisions on licensing using our data. Largely, what I've seen is the historical availability is kind of the key piece. Basically, what we're seeing in this slide here. A lot of times, if you're either the person licensing it, it affects how you're going to price it in the market based on where it's been available before. And then, of course, on the flip side too, the person looking to buy it, it materially, like I mentioned, if you're Tubi and you see, oh, it's never been available on any AVOD, you can get a good deal on it, that is a clear win. So I'd say that's the historical availability is really where on the like the nitty gritty for the licensing teams. And then at a more macro level, kind of some of the stuff that we shared around like how your catalog compares to your competitors or what your competitors are investing or divesting in. I see them using that to sort of determine their overarching catalog strategy. Like, oh, we want to grow our comedy by 30% this year.
Hey
Great.
guys,
And go
sorry,
ahead.
this is Jean. We've got time for one last question.
Great.
Cool. Thank you, Gene. And as a reminder, this will be sent out. You'll have access to the deck, to the recording. That last question here. I wonder what reasons for those titles you mentioned not yet being streamed. License price, question mark, or exclusivity. Any care to
Yeah.
hypothesize?
So there's definitely some of them where I've seen just like simply people just don't know. Like they have a good understanding of what's on their catalog, but they don't know what's out there. And necessarily like there isn't an easy way to filter to be, again, we have it in our data, but like if you don't have I sort everything by popular that's not available on any SVOD, that's a bit of a unique query. So I think part of it is just it's just hard to find. You kind of have to dig through a haystack unless you've got like a good data set to power it. Some of them I'm curious though, like, and I put this out to the market too, like Oppenheimer. I don't know, that one just feels like there's some sort of it's such a massive movie that one like something in my head says oh, there's something funky. There must be some weird rights thing or something as to why that one maybe specifically isn't available for a year after being one of the biggest movies.
Awesome. Jan, thank you for that last question there. I think that's it. David, we
All
have
right.
gotten through all the
Yeah.
slides.
I would say nice job,
Thanks,
you
Tim.
guys, on sharing lots of great information within our 30-minute window. So thank you to both of you, and thank you to all of our attendees. And as been said, you will be receiving this deck and the presentation. So with that, we'll let you all go and have a great day and hope to see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Gene.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Gene. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, David.